Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Oh, when's it gonna end? Hello, Myth and Magic fans, and welcome to the Hot List season, summertime. Although, of course, seasons only make sense if you have them where you live. And here in England, we only have weather. My wife and I went for a walk along the towpath near our house. And one of my wife's friends, who's a woman aged probably about 70, asked how we were, and we told her, fine. And she said, oh, when's it gonna end? And as she said this, she looked up and she looked around, and she looked down the horizon and into the air. So I guess she was speaking about the weather, because we've had 4 warm days in a row now, which is an amazingly unusual thing for these British Isles. But I think she also probably obliquely meant what's going on with this ongoing epidemic. And in England, as you may know, although the Prime Minister has announced Freedom Day and he told us we could all strip off our masks and huddle into densely packed areas to frolic like everything was all right, in truth, the infections are still high and everyone is now going around wearing their mask because they choose to disobey whatever they're told by the authorities, and they are, on the whole, ignoring going to clubs, bars and restaurants. We went to a restaurant and it was empty. In fact, I'm quite surprised the authorities had not capitalised on this English spirit of defiance earlier. They should have actually said, at least a month ago, you must all report to a nightclub near you and you must breathe in each other's fumes. Or they should have said, you must repair to your nearest sports arena and you must embrace and kiss as many strangers as you can. Then that way people would have said, well, I'm definitely doing the opposite of whatever they're telling me, and they wouldn't have gone and started spreading the epidemic. But back to my question that I was posed by the old lady. Oh, when's it gonna end? I felt like shouting, but I didn't because she's a nice old lady, so I held my breath. But I felt like shouting, the answer is who knows? Nobody knows when it's going to end, because this thing we're experiencing and we're experiencing together is known as life. It's not a book. It doesn't have a satisfactory conclusion. It's a plot that's full of holes. The bad is they sometimes come out on top. There's no sensible theme to it, and the moral message is certainly not clear. Clean living won't necessarily save you from harm, and wicked characters, the antagonists, often win all the prizes. When's it gonna end? It doesn't. It doesn't end. It goes on and on and on. If you want a neat ending, you'll need to immerse yourself in a book. And so, the hot summer days. The English media are not used to the concept of what some people know as seasons, so they choose to describe any straightforward summer's day as a heat wave, and any straightforward winter's day as a cold snap. We had a heat wave that lasted 4 days. That's pretty impressive around here. Although we're now going into our regular climate, which is rain, with scattered showers and occasional downpours. Terry Pratchett once said, summer isn't a time, it's a place. Although I agree with his lateral thinking on this, it's easy for him to say because he was rich enough to jet off and find summer in some exotic location. I bet he found summer sheltering on a warm island in southern Italy or on a walking trip of Borneo. But I do agree that we should try to inhabit summer. We should try to live in it, because in summer we feel youthful and we imagine that we might stay young forever, which is why it's a bit depressing to hear an older lady say, in a mournful tone, oh, when's it going to end? Perhaps people like her would be better off sitting indoors and contemplating the other line, which comes from another fantasy writer, winter's coming. The ancient Romans described the hot and suffocating period between mid-July and mid-August as the dog days, dies canicula. And that's because they noticed that Sirius, which they called the dog star, rises with the sun during this cycle, so they believed Sirius, the dog, brought them the hot and muggy weather. During the dog days, Roman citizens ate ice cream, they turned up their air conditioning. Yes, the wealthiest people did have aircon in their homes, and the luckiest vacated their townhouses to resort to luxurious country villas close to cooling sea breezes, probably where people like Terry Pratchett now also hang out. Anyway, I hope you have time to enjoy and indulge in all the outdoor activities you have promised yourself during the long winter months. And I hope, of course, this includes lots of vacation reading. And while I'm on the subject about vacation reading, be sure to follow my Introvertish book club. It's a Facebook group for people who dislike everything else about book clubs. If you've never felt the urge to join a book club before, I bet it's because it's about all the stupid rules and the expectations. So my Introvertish book club, which is INTROVERTISH, is exactly the one for you because it has no expectations and it has no stupid rules. Join my Introvertish book club at facebook.com/groups/Introvertish book club, all one word. Introvertish is a word made up by me. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about human chauvinism. I'm also going to ask you about where is your flow. I've been thinking about human chauvinism since the Pentagon UFO report, which is the assessment of the UFO threat that was published on June the 25th, 2021. And I've been thinking about how we're ill-prepared to deal with an alien invasion or extraterrestrial beings or even interdimensional entities. And we're especially ill-prepared if we continue as a species to be so darned egotistically ethnocentric. I remember the science hero and true genius, Carl Sagan, once saying how much he disliked Star Wars because of human chauvinism. When picked up on it, the interviewer who was speaking to him about Star Wars suggested that the famous cantina scene has lots of weird-looking aliens in it. But Sagan said something along the lines of, yes, that's true, but humans still dominate the story, don't they? They still rule the galaxy. And the human Han Solo, he gets all the awards, while Chewbacca gets nothing. Carl Sagan didn't add the words, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, which was how Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by Alec Guinness, described the cantina. And incidentally, it's interesting, isn't it, that they chose to use the word cantina, which is a word used by Latin Americans. In other words, it's a biased word. Why didn't they use a less chauvinistic word like bar or saloon? Or a nice English word like tavern? Well, they didn't want to describe it like that. They wanted to describe it as a place of villainy, a wretched hive of scum. And then, if you will, consider Tolkien's Middle-earth. Yes, it has elves and dwarves and ents and hobbits, but at heart it's a human-inhabited world. In fact, it's even reminiscent of England and the Shires, where Tolkien himself was brought up. And Hobbiton is said to be around about the same latitude as Oxford. It's a place that we all recognise and we like, and so we can inhabit it easily and we can look down on all the other species. Do you have a disposition or a tendency to put humans dominant or superior in your fantasy? What is human chauvinism? We need to turn to the ancient Greeks because they had a word for the civilised world. They called it the ecumen, which is E-C-U-M-E-N-E, ecumen. Ecumenical comes from this root word, and it means the inhabited world. And when the Greeks said inhabited, what they actually meant was inhabited by them. They weren't talking about some random tribes of strangers or some random tribes of what they might term as lesser peoples. They were talking about them. This egotistical attitude gave them the right to sail around the seas, landing in places that were clearly not theirs because they weren't inhabited at that stage, although of course they were, and then claiming these places for themselves. And obviously our own forefathers did exactly the same thing when they colonised the Americas, the Caribbean islands, Australia and New Zealand and the other Pacific islands. And when a member of the ecumen arrives at a place that they have decided amongst themselves is uninhabited, although it probably isn't, they even call it a possession. So when we landed on the moon, we stuck a flag in it. When we landed on Mars, we start treating it as if it's our own, because it's our possession. As I'm sure you know, chauvinism is the irrational belief in the superiority or the dominance of our own people, who are seen as naturally strong and virtuous, while all others are considered weak and unworthy and even inferior. And so, in super chauvinism, which is the chauvinism of us over all other organisms, or the chauvinism of us over all other taxonomic units, human chauvinism is the irrational belief that our species ranks higher in genius, in survivability, in transcendence, and even in infallibility than all the other species. And of course this is a grossly stupid and therefore irrational idea, given that many members of our species have been destroyed and mutilated and incapacitated by species other than our own. And it's happening right now, of course, and it probably always will. The very idea of human supremacy is grotesquely illogical, if not perversely reckless because of this. We're almost indisputably one of the weakest, dumbest, laziest and dirtiest creatures on this planet, and it's only our boastful and delusional pretensions that keep us moving through thick and thin, kicking and bludgeoning our way around the existence, causing blood and destruction everywhere we go. And sometimes I think the only difference between us, the Homo sapiens, and our closest relatives on this planet, which are the great apes, is that we were the ones who were given the rather undesirable gift of ego. Given that the human race has been brought down frequently by global pandemics such as the bubonic plague and the Great Plague and the Spanish flu and of course now COVID, you'd think we might be more vigilant and conscious and, let's be honest, completely in awe of nature. We ought to feel a mixture of reverence and respect at the truly unmatched, completely unstoppable and thorough superiority of all other things on this planet, even those things that are smaller than bacteria, for example, submicroscopic infectious agents. And yet, when you hear people yelling, "This will not stop me going abroad on my holidays," you must ask yourself which species is the most intelligent. Is it the ever-evolving SARS-CoV-2? Or is it the morons who say openly and publicly, like they have done this week in Britain, "I don't have to wash my hands anymore, and that's good because I've had enough of these germs telling me what to do"? And since this is a fantasy-based podcast, I must add we are talking here about a terrestrial species, one that's found on our own planet. It lives within our own dimension, and it's a life form that we are very familiar with. Because even though COVID is so small it can only be detected by electron microscope, and by the way it's 2,000 times smaller than a dust mite, and dust mites are barely visible to us, at least it's something that we've been living with all of this time. Submicroscopic agents have been around since the beginning of time. Imagine if we met dragons, imagine if we ran into werewolves, and imagine what we would actually do if an alien life form stepped out of one of those many UAPs that have been filling up our skies recently. We'd have no chance, would we? We'd have no chance at all because of our chauvinism. So why are humans chauvinistic? Well, one theory is that chauvinism is a natural byproduct of society, and it comes from our earliest origins, that when we lived in small tribes which were probably no bigger than an extended family group. So when we were dealing with other tribes, and these would include Neanderthals, it was thought that close contact with them might be detrimental to our gene pool. So our ancestors were taught to consider everyone who was different to them as somehow lower and inferior in status. We also learned, about the same time as that, to work together to hunt and to fish for other creatures so we could eat them. And this gave us an unwarranted confidence in our own individual abilities. But you should remember that individually we are very weak. We can only beat other species if we work together as a team. And incidentally, this is yet another lesson we don't seem to have actually learned yet. If we actually started to work together as a team, we'd be able to be slightly ahead of our competitors, but there you are. This exaggerated sense of self-importance has not been helped at all by the Holy Bible, and there are other religious teachings which also say the same kind of thing. But the Holy Bible suggests that we have been given dominion over the fish of the sea and over birds of the air and over cattle and over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. And there's a less attractive theory, and it's another theory, and it's the theory of chauvinism that suggests that this is an attempt by some to drive away the feelings of anxiety and shame that they harbour privately inside, because they know privately inside how weak and useless they actually are. So their way of dealing with it is to be chauvinistic. So the chauvinistic mindset doesn't stand on logic, and it's not rational thinking, so you'll never get a chauvinist to change their mind. But I hate to break it to them, chauvinists are ill. It's going to be more difficult if they've chosen to isolate themselves away from logical argument or remove themselves from common sense reasoning. But they're not looking for change anyway, are they? So because they're not looking for any change, there's little point trying to change their mind or convince them that they're wrong. And we can hardly change our own minds, let alone change the minds of others. The only way to change a person's opinion is to show them that they are wrong. Show them. And maybe this is where you and I come in, because as fantasy fiction authors, perhaps we should be thinking up stories where the alien life forms get the upper hand, where the humans are not the masters, but they're the servants, where human frailty is an impediment, because it is an impediment, where human frailty is, if you like, exaggerated, and the strength and superiority of other entities is magnified. But good luck with that, and I ask Zeus for strength for you and for all fantasy fiction writers, and I ask for strength to beat human chauvinism. Good luck. How is your flow? Artists, especially painters, but also artisans and crafters and writers, very often gamers and sports people too, they frequently get lost in their art. You've heard the expression before, lost in their art. If you ever looked at a clock and you said, gosh, where's the time gone? Or you missed out on some meals because you've been feeling so ultra productive, or your neck is aching because you've been hunkered down for so long and your eyes feel blurry because you've been hard at it, then you've probably been in the zone. You've been in a state of flux that psychologists call a flow state. For the most part, people can decide what they want to focus their attention on. However, when a person is in the flow state, these same people are completely absorbed within their chosen task, and therefore they don't seem to be able to make conscious decisions outside the effort of their current endeavour. They also tend to lose awareness of things like time and other people and distractions, and even basic bodily needs. In positive psychology, a flow state is the state of mind in which a person engages in something, and it's usually creative. They are engaging in an activity that they completely immerse themselves in, and so therefore they have a feeling of energised focus. It's a type of total participation, in other words, full involvement, and these people enjoy the experience they find through the actual processes of the activity rather than the results of that activity. And there are 6 factors that flowsters, as I like to call them, not floaters, flowsters experience. They experience intense and focused concentration on the present moment. They experience fusion of action and consciousness. They experience a loss of reflective self-awareness. They experience a sense of personal agency control over the situation or activity. They sense a distortion of time. In other words, the experience of time is subjective for them, it's altered. And they experience an activity that is intrinsically rewarding. What I mean by that is there's a word called autotelic, which means there's a satisfaction in doing it, not in the satisfaction of getting to the end, the goal, but in actually doing it. If you've checked off any of those, one or more, then you're probably a flowster, not a floater, a flowster. Although some of those factors can be experienced independently, if you experience them in a line or together, it's what psychologists call a flow experience. And if you have a seamless flow experience, you can enjoy additional feelings. And these are a feeling of immediate feedback because you get a sense of pride in your own work. You get a feeling of the potential to succeed because you know that you'll do even better tomorrow. And you'll get a feeling that you're engrossed in the experience. And so therefore all your other needs become negligible. If you enjoy doing your best while at the same time contributing to something that's beyond yourself, for example, writing a book or writing a poem or just writing a chapter, then you, like me, will probably feel resentful if something or someone interrupts your flow. And there are some common barriers to flow, and I've also thought up some solutions. One barrier to flow is that the goals you've set yourself are unclear. And the solution to this, of course, is to make sure that you ask yourself SMART goals. If you don't know what SMART is, you need to look it up. I'm not going to go through it today, but you should know that your goals should be specific and measurable. Another barrier is that you don't get enough feedback, and limited feedback will, of course, reduce your motivation. My solution to that is as you go along, you should start seeking opinions and feedback from your trusted friends and your supporters. Don't just rely on your own self-satisfaction to get through a project. Another barrier to flow is that you start making some more mistakes or more missteps than usual. I often have this happen to me when I'm writing, and my wife, who's a crafter and she works down in the end of our garden, she's working on beading projects or cross-stitching or other needlework. She often says, I just can't do it today. She comes in and she says, I just can't do it today. I don't know what it is. I keep making mistakes. The solution to this is get some fresh air, get some exercise, divert your attention from a bit, especially use your hands for something else, but never try to push on because it won't work. You need to bring in a period of rest and diversion before you continue. For most creative people, though, flow is a positive thing. And that's because you feel completely involved in what you're doing. You have the feeling of being outside of an everyday reality. And of course, this is comforting if it's a time like this in COVID. You get inner clarity because you feel good, because you know you're doing well. You have a sense of accomplishment. You have the skills that you need for the task. You have a sense of serenity because you have a sense of growing beyond your own worries. And you enjoy the sense of timelessness because being focused on a project means that hours pass quickly. And of course you have intrinsic motivation because whatever produces your flow is its own reward. But beware, there are some negatives. The experience of flow, like everything else, is not good in an absolute sense. It's only good because it has the potential to make your life richer and more intense and more meaningful. It should not be the basis of a balanced, harmonious and properly proportioned life. It should simply be part of your healthy living. So if your flow state takes over, especially if it takes over diet or hygiene or healthy exercise and of course relationships, then you will suffer. And of course enjoyable activities that produce fluency and are therefore capable of enhancing our feelings of well-being, can and will become addictive if a person allows them to take control. And like all dependencies, once the flow state turns into a dependency, it can be an extremely painful habit to have to give up. If you've ever wondered why some people are so dedicated to their art, or how they write 4 books a year, or how they focus on all their projects much better than you ever can, It's probably because they are flowsters and they enjoy being in the flow state. Although it could be that their flow state is now turning into a dependency and it's something they can't control. So don't compare yourself against them. If you can't concentrate like they can, if you can't knuckle down like they do, there's no reason to regret or blame yourself. There's certainly no reason to feel guilty about it, because not everybody can connect to the flow state. Not everyone is what I would call a fluid flowster. Most people are just typical. They're just typical people, and yet they still might want to write a book or create a piece of art or do some cross-stitch. So the best thing that they can do, the best way they can develop, is by creating some routines for themselves and adapting those routines to their everyday life, and to function as creatively as they can within a sensible world. So they may well cook their dinners, they might clean their home, they might drive their car, they obviously own a pet, they watch television, and they occasionally read a book, and they can fit into that sensible, balanced life a little bit of creativity. They don't have to be totally absorbed by the flow. So if you're one of those people, just a typical person, that's fine. You can still do it. You can just fit it into your normal life. So in other words, be modest about your ambitions. Work gradually but incrementally towards goals, and put things aside when you don't feel the need to carry on. Never get frustrated by trying to take on more than you can handle. You can do it. We can all do this. Let's all work together to create the best art we can. Next week, I'm speaking to Miles, a communications specialist from Ames in Iowa. He's the author and the narrator of The Warning Woods, which is a horror podcast, and he delivers short, chilling stories to listeners every week. His podcast stories run the gamut of the horror genre. From folklore and legends to modern tech-based stories, Miles keeps his scares fresh and unpredictable. We wanted to chat with him about what makes things scary. So if you want to find out how to write a scary story, this is an interview to tune into. We also ask him about writing what he describes as the new generation of horror. What is the new generation of horror? And we ask about knuckling down to a writing routine. Tune in to my interview with Miles Tritle from Ames, Iowa. He's the author and narrator of Warning Woods next week.